I work as a part-time contractor, specializing in flooring. It's good, fulfilling work for the most part. I learned the trade from my cousin, and it supplements my day trading income. I've been doing it for a few years now, and while I enjoy it, I'm sure my work stories would bore the average person. That was until a few months ago. I had a job just on the outskirts of town, a large but pretty old house that had recently been bought by new owners that wanted to renovate the basement, which had never been fully finished by the previous guy who owned it. We had been working for a while, and things were going pretty normally. We were working to remove the previously decrepit flooring. I was chiseling in the far corner of the room when suddenly the ground under me just kind of collapsed. Before I even knew what was happening, I was splayed out in the dark, pain screeching across my body as my head pounded. I was covered in debris and laid out stunned, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. One of the other contractors peered over the edge at me, asking if I was all right. He was roughly 3 feet above me, looking down into the hole. I slowly sat up, and while I was pretty torn up, I wasn't seriously injured or anything. I told him I was all right and had a look around. I noticed I was in some kind of tunnel. To my right and left, the dirt path drifted off into the darkness. After I'd been pulled out and cleaned up a little, I told the other workers what I had seen. As far as we knew from the blueprints of the house, there was no underground chambers or anything under the basement we should have been aware of, other than the usual plumbing and electrical stuff. We halted the job and contacted the previous owner, who knew nothing about any tunnels below the house. We filed a report with the city, given that we were literally out of our depth and had no idea how to approach a situation. They told us they'd investigate, and for the time being, we weren't to continue work on the property. A few days later, we were contacted and told that because of the danger of the site, the new owners had been compensated, and the city had taken ownership of the property and condemned it. We were paid for our work, plus a little extra for the trouble, and that was that. The other guys were content, but I have to admit my curiosity was piqued. Like I said, this field isn't exactly known for excitement outside of the industry, but nothing like this had ever happened to me or anyone else I knew. I mean, secret underground tunnels. That's the stuff that a good mystery's made out of. I decided to talk about it to the local paper, and at the very least, I thought it could give me a minute or two in the spotlight. Who doesn't want to be on the news, right? I met with one of the journalists and told my story. She grabbed some pictures of my scabs and told me I was almost guaranteed to be featured. It's a small town, and not much happens around here. I figured I'd at least get a blurb on their online publication or something. Instead, the next day I got an email from them saying that unfortunately they had to reject my submission. I was a little stung, honestly, but I didn't take it too harshly. Not like it was going to be life-changing or anything like that. It wasn't a half hour later that I received a knock on my door. I opened the door to a short but well-built man. He was wearing a fairly plain button-up, a jacket, and some jeans, nothing out of the ordinary. He asked if he could come in, and he said he was from the city. I agreed, and we went and sat in my living room. I'll make this short. I don't want to waste your time. The city is asking you to keep the incident at the property in Hillside to yourself. We're investigating things thoroughly, and we do not want to cause any alarm to residents or attract any vandals or urban explorers. I was taken aback, since while I was curious, I didn't think it was as big a deal as all that. I agreed nonetheless, not wanting any real trouble. I did let him know that I'd contacted the local paper, but they rejected my story anyway. "We know," he said, and his cordial demeanor turned suddenly grim. He stood up and turned ever so slightly so I could get a look at the holstered gun on his hip. "Don't do that again. Are we clear?" My blood ran cold, and I affirmed that we were. He nodded and told me to have a good day before he left. I was stunned. I didn't know what the hell had just happened. As I was reasoning through things, I figured no legitimate city personnel would threaten me with a gun. I mean, he wasn't a cop, but who would care so much about this, or even know about it? How did they know I was talking to a journalist? Over the next few days, it ate me up. Apparently the other guys had similar experiences with someone from the city, though not as drastic as mine. Most of them figured we had run into something we shouldn't have, and we should just leave it alone. One, though, Raphael, seemed even more interested than I was. I'd worked with him on a few projects before, and he was a little quirky, to say the least. He called me privately and proposed that we investigate the site ourselves. I turned him down. After all, someone had enough interest in the situation to follow me and flash me his gun, supposedly on behalf of the city. Raph said that he would go with or without somebody, but I told him even if I wanted to go with him, there was no way we could go back into it. The house, I'm sure, was being watched, and city workers were taking care of the tunnels. It wasn't like we were equipped to go excavating all over the area the house was on. He dropped in for a while, confronting me with sound logic. It was only a few days later that he sent me a picture of an open hole taken at some hill. Found this kind of close. Going to investigate. Text you when I'm out, the message read. A pit grew in my stomach. Surely whatever was going on was far above our heads, and he was taking a big risk being nosy. I figured he'd get caught, and I'd get another visit asking if I knew about what he was doing. Part of me also worried that he would get physically hurt, though, or even lost. What if they sealed him up in there? Or what if a tunnel collapsed? My fear grew over the next few days as I didn't hear anything from him. I began to worry more and more, and I thought about calling the police, but there was that curiosity creeping back in. Morbid, gnawing curiosity. Strange sense that the police in this situation would not be my friends. I figured I should at least find the spot he went to let the authorities know, you know. Early the next morning, I drove out to the area. There were quite a few hiking trails, so I gathered and started on one of those as I made my way around until I found the hole. My heart dropped when I saw his car parked in one of the lots, with 3 tickets piled mindlessly on the windshield. I started on the closest path, trying to find the spot he had sent a picture from. It was clear from his photo that he'd gone off trail, but I was hoping to at least get an idea of where exactly he'd headed. After roughly 20 minutes of wandering around, I saw a hill that looked like it could be it in the distance. I made for it as quickly as possible, sweating up a storm. I cursed the fact that I'd only brought a single bottle of water as I slammed it down my dry throat. Eventually, I reached the hill and began to circle it. It didn't take me long to find the hole. I froze at its entrance, staring down at it. It was roughly the height of the chamber that I'd landed in when I originally had my accident. Call the police, I told myself, but I didn't. The gaping maw in front of me seemed to pull me in. Why I climbed in, I couldn't tell you. Fear for Raph, knowing a minute wasted could be the difference between life and death. Fear of what would happen to me if the authorities got involved. And a rational desire to uncover the truth all by myself. Whatever the reason, I climbed in and started down the slowly dropping shaft. I hadn't prepared at all. I had my phone flashlight, which poorly illuminated the chamber. I slowly inched my way down, stopping every now and again to listen for anything. All I could hear was my own breathing. I continued before calling out, "Raph, it's me! Raph, you down here?" No reply. I knew this had to be a long tunnel, impossibly long. The house was a solid 3-minute drive from the recreational area. That might not sound like much, but when you're crawling in a tunnel, it sure as hell is. I resolved that if I didn't find any trace of him in the next few minutes, I would turn around and bite the bullet with the cops. Not long after that, I saw an opening in the wall. It was another tunnel, shooting down left. Right next to the new hole, I saw something etched in the dirt, a crude arrow pointing up, and some letters next to it. They were pretty hard to read, and I pressed my face and phone light real close. The scrawlings were faint and jagged, but this is what I could make out. In something ST1 something. I pondered for a second on what it might mean. Was it graffiti? I hadn't even noticed something was now in the opening. A rat's face peeking out of the darkness. I jumped back and yelped, slamming into the chamber wall. I caught my breath. I've seen a few rats in my day, and I've never really been scared of them. I shined the light at it, ready to tell it to go away. My stomach dropped, and my adrenaline flooded my body a second time. It wasn't a rat. It was rat-like, covered in fur and whiskers, with huge ears and a protruding snout. But it was nearly man-sized. It wore a ragged vest and tattered camo pants. In one hand it held a rusted revolver, pointed straight at me. Between its teeth, it clenched a long blade. I said nothing. I was paralyzed with fear, but its free hand had begun to motion me to come closer, and it turned to point down the chamber. I saw a long, fleshy tail below its legs as it shifted. It pulled the knife from its mouth and began to speak at me. It was at once guttural and squeaky, but it was clearly English. "Come, I bring you to Major." I began to stammer, protesting and putting my hands up, my phone light clattering to the ground and shining up. No, I'm sorry, I'll leave, please." As I pleaded, it began to inch towards me, nostrils flaring. In retrospect, it must have wanted me alive. Otherwise, it would have just shot me. I heard something coming down the way I had come. Glancing, I saw another shape inching towards me. I thought it might be a second one of them. Suddenly, a bright beam of light flooded the chamber, and I shielded my eyes. The creature let out a terrible shriek, and I could hear the sound of scurrying. A deafening boom followed a gunshot, which my ears had yet to recover from. I felt hands grab me and pull me back up the tunnel a ways. I looked up and saw it was a human man. He let go of me for a second, and with great speed, he withdrew, primed, and threw a canister down the tunnel, which started spewing some sort of gas. Instantly my eyes began to sting, and he screamed at me to follow him out, roughly pulling me forward. I crawled blindly after him, repeatedly scraping myself and hitting my head in a panic. Eventually we burst out of the tunnel and into the sun. I laid sprawled on the ground, everything in pain. My eyes, my ears, my lungs, my hands, my knees. They were all searing. Through blurred eyes, I saw the man intently looking down the chamber, a pistol of his own pointed down. I recognized him as the man from the city that had threatened me at the start of all this. After what seemed like forever, he put the gun away and came to me. He asked if I was injured, and I shook my head. He helped me up, and we walked a ways from the opening, but also away from the trail. He sat me down and began to yell. "I thought I was clear that you were going to drop it," he said, burying his face in his hands. "I messed up. I should have trailed you longer. I thought you were done with this." I said nothing, and he turned to me with an intense look on his face. "Why were you out here? And who knew you were here?" My friend, my work buddy, Raph, he went down there. I hadn't heard from him. He worked with me at the job." His face went pale. "He went down there?" I thought that guy was going to be less problematic. This is bad. This is really bad. He took a deep breath, and after a moment of collecting himself, he spoke. "Forget about him. Forget you ever knew him. No, to hell with that. I'm already screwed. My superiors are going to crucify me. I'll tell you this. Forget everything. Your job, your apartment, anything you have here. Get the hell out of the country, and don't tell anyone where you're going, because I'm sure I'll have to testify. Don't ever speak of what you saw. I'm not saying this to cover my ass. I'm as good as dead, but if you want any chance of having a normal life after this, go somewhere quiet. Start fresh. Leave this all behind you, and do it quick." He stopped talking and pulled out a radio. He He fiercely pointed towards the trail, and I didn't hesitate. I went all the way back, hopping into my car, and drove straight home. I sat for a while, stunned, before slowly grabbing some important things. My cousin Dave had a place down in Mexico, a majority of the year. Although I lost my personal phone, I still had my work phone, and I got a hold of him. I didn't tell him much, just that I was in trouble, and I needed to get down there as quickly as possible to figure out my situation. After he verified that I hadn't killed anyone or anything like that, he agreed to help me make arrangements to get out of here. I won't go into much detail, but I more or less fled without a word, taking only money and my passport, alongside some clothes and stuff. I eventually got down to his place, a quiet little spot in a small resort town. He put me up for a while and also helped me make a game plan for my next move. Of course, he wanted to hear what happened. I told him everything over a couple of drinks. When I finished, he swished the glass for a second, thinking hard. "You remember my dad, right?" he eventually asked. I nodded. I hadn't known my uncle too well, and he had a reputation in the family for being kind of a kook and a recluse. He'd been in the Army during the Vietnam War, being dishonorably discharged, got into a lot of conspiracy nonsense, and ended up being divorced by my aunt when I was young. He more or less disappeared after that. Really never saw his kids or anyone else in the family. You see, my dad, most of the stuff he got into was crackpot garbage, but there was one thing he always raved about that he swore he had personally seen evidence of. You know, the abandoned factory outside the city. Everyone in the area did. It was no secret for locals that in the 60s, the U.S. Army had requisitioned the facility as a testing ground for demolitions, and after the Vietnam War, they packed up and left it abandoned. My uncle had been a desk jockey at the facility and was discharged for mentally unstable behavior. Dad was convinced that there was more than demolition going on out there when he was in the Army. He claimed that he did some snooping around and discovered that the demolition thing was a cover-up for secret projects. He took a deep breath and laughed, a little shaky in his face. This is going to sound silly. Actually, no, it's not. Not after what you told me. He thought they were trying to breed some kind of super soldier there to use in Nam. He was part of logistics and said they were always discreetly bringing in all kinds of lab equipment alongside the normal stuff. There was one shipment he caught a glimpse of, and he said there was a bunch of pet supplies for rats. He got this idea that the Army was attempting to splice rodent DNA into troops. You know, because of all the Viet Cong tunnel systems and the tunnel rats. He thought they were trying to take it a step further, literally making soldiers with rat DNA to infiltrate the tunnels. The story was that when he tried to bring things up, they dismissed him, till he attempted to expose things himself and got himself caught and discharged on a faulty psychological ground. Given how he was, we always figured he was kind of crazy, and that they were probably in the right. We both sat in silence for a little while, and I strangely started to laugh. Guess he wasn't so crazy after all, then. Once I got set up, things were okay for a while. I found ways to apply my skill set to my new area and work jobs to get by. No government men came after me, and I had more or less made it out, free and clear. Why am I posting then? Well, I'm not sure. Just like my decision to enter the tunnels, it's undercut by that lingering sense of curiosity. I can't say I want to be found, but I almost do. It's lonely, and I've got no one to share this experience with out here. I'm wondering what all ended up happening. My life is kind of dead end now, working just to pay for the basics. How do you go back to normalcy after something like that? I'm sure this will end up across somebody's radar. I don't know if I'll end up with a bullet in my head in the middle of the night, or me taken to some kind of secret interrogation facility or what, but I feel compelled to share, and I accept whatever fate is coming my way. Someone was screaming. The sound pulled me from a dream, and I woke in the dark, short of breath and damp with sweat. It was my mother, I realized. Have you ever noticed how you can recognize the voice of one close to you, even through as little as a cough or a cry? There's no need for words. I heard and knew it was her. I sat up in bed, confused and frightened. The screams had stopped, but I could still hear talking downstairs. My parents. I slid out from beneath the covers and crept to my door, bare feet cold on the ancient wooden boards. A decade had passed, but I still remember the strongest details. The way those floorboards creaked, the dust that made me sneeze, the shadows of the night clouds slipping silently across the scene, nipping at my heels. All these things, as meaningless as they were, are burned into me, like scars when I close my eyes. Mom and Dad's voices were raised, upset. In our old home, they would have woken the neighbors by now. But not here, not in the middle of nowhere. There was no one within a mile. I held the door handle and eased it down so it made no sound, stepping into the hallway, leaving my door open behind me. Moonlight spilled out around my feet, a pale wash chasing shadows into the corners. Felt like I'd only been asleep for a few hours, but I couldn't be certain. I worked my way to the top of the stairs, a few inches at a time. I could make out occasional words from below, but nothing yet that made any sense. I'd stopped to listen when the door beside me creaked open, making me jump. My younger sister, Maria, was only 6, all wide eyes and worried face and tousled black hair that hung wild around her. I recall thinking it was odd that our brother Ryan hadn't left his room. Usually if our parents woke us up with their arguing, he would be up first, to get us back to sleep and tell us not to worry, to tell us not to listen. "Go to bed," I hissed at her. She frowned and retreated, but kept the door ajar. I tiptoed forward onto the top step, listening. My father, loud and demanding. "Tell you again. Now don't make me do it, Lisa." "Do what?" My mother's angry, tearful. "Crazy. Don't do this. Call the police. Phone an ambulance. Please, David, please." Her voice went on as I heard footsteps approaching the stairs. They were coming up. A surge of panic, and I turned, rushing back to my room. I caught my sister peering around her doorframe and mouthed, "Go!" to her as I passed. The footsteps behind me grew closer, my mother's voice clear. I climbed back into bed, heart racing, when I heard her feet in the hallway. They went into Ryan's room, which was opposite of Maria's, but not their own opposite mine. Why, I wondered. Where was my brother? Dad was speaking, voice thick and heavy. He told Mom to sit down, then again louder, and she snapped a reply I couldn't make out. "Did you break the rules I gave you?" he asked her. "Did any of you?" My mother replied inaudibly. "Did you break any of the rules I gave you?" His voice raised again. "Just answer me!" "No." Her voice broke as she shouted back. "No! Please, David, for God's sake, phone an ambulance. It might not be too late. It might not. You don't know. You don't know it." "Did anyone come in the house?" He cut her off, tone low and threatening. "Did any of you leave?" "No, David, please." She was still speaking when I heard him step into the hall. Then the door closed and keys rattled. My mother's voice rose to a scream, and I could hear her running across the floor. "What are you doing?" Her hands were hammering on the door. "David, what are you doing? Don't hurt them, David. Don't you hurt our girls. David, please." Why would she say that, I thought. He would never hurt us. My father would never hurt me. What was going on? I heard the creak of floorboards beneath her cries, and then Dad opened my sister's door. He spoke quietly. I couldn't make it out. Maria's door closed and locked. Then he was walking again, towards my room. Mom was still shouting, sobbing, calling our names, words collapsing into each other until they were only sounds of frustration, pain, and rage. My door opened. I looked over the edge of the covers, pretending I was still asleep. I was so scared, I didn't know what else to do. My father stood in the doorway. He was holding a shotgun, and it was pointed at my chest. "Evie, sweetheart, we need to talk." We had only been in the house for a week. If everything had went to plan, we would have been gone before another month had passed. At the beginning of the year, Dad's elder brother had passed away. He was the only one living member on that side of the family, so my father inherited everything. Our parents were contacted by a law firm who had been engaged as executors of the will, and a meeting was organized to discuss the details. Now, our dad hadn't spoken to his brother in decades, or anyone on his side of the family for that matter. Ryan, Maria, and myself had never met any of them. Dad would never talk about them. Strangely, he seemed more worried than upset by the news of our uncle's death. When my parents attended the meeting, the true scope of the inheritance was revealed. The home, left to him, was more than a century old and had once housed 20 family members and staff. 3 floors, basement, attic, outhouse, and miles of property. At present, most of the place was filled with an accumulation of possessions of 5 generations of rich landowners. The contents alone could be worth a small fortune. The house and the grounds certainly were. My mom, shocked and delighted, couldn't wait to tell us. Dad, however, remained taciturn, simultaneously unsurprised and pained by his apparent good fortune. He didn't want to accept it, he said. Our mother couldn't believe him and demanded to know why. Because of the condition of the will, he told her. We would all have to move there and take possession of the house. No one except family could be allowed inside, not under any circumstances. But he didn't want to go back there, no matter what the offer was. He certainly wouldn't take his wife and children to that godforsaken place. Mom was furious. She thought it was crazy to turn it down. So what if he had to move there? His refusal to explain any further only made it worse. They argued on and off for weeks. There was a silence between them that went on for days until we were in bed. Then the arguments would begin again. Why wouldn't he accept the house? She would ask. Why wouldn't he explain? My father never answered, just repeated the same refusal and denials. "Whatever happened there's over," I heard her say one night. "You never spoke to them, never spoke about any of them. They're gone. I'm your wife. We're your family, here and now." I lay awake in bed, picking out bits and pieces as I tried to sleep. I never heard the final argument, but Ryan did. He told me and Maria about it on the walk to school. Mom said she had spoken to a lawyer of her own about the will. "We could move there for just a short time," she said, "maybe only a month. Then we claim we can't stay because it's hurting the kids' upbringing. It wouldn't even be a lie. There isn't a good school for 40 miles, police or ambulance for that matter. No other families are nearby. It's isolated. We say it's affecting all our mental health. There's no living relatives to contest with. My lawyer thinks that we could fight it out in court and win. Afterwards, we sell what we can and keep what we like. Do anything we want. We'll be rich, David. No more 5 people living in 2 bedrooms. We could do whatever we want. All we have to do is make it look like we tried." My father hadn't replied. Then Mom told him that she would leave with us if he didn't accept it. Divorce. To be refusing this opportunity, just throwing away all our futures, she said, over reasons that he couldn't even explain. If he could be that stupid and selfish, then he didn't deserve to be our father, and wasn't the man that she thought he had been. David had left after that, Ryan told us. Went out for hours during the night. The 2 of them didn't speak at all the next day. Then a week later, our parents sat us down and said they had news. We were going away together to clear out and sell the old house that we had inherited. It should only be a month or so, they said. Then we could come back home. "I need you to tell me what you done today." "Dad?" I began to cry, unable to hold back the tears. What's going on? Why is... Answer me, Evie. I don't want to hear anything else. Tell me what happened today, and nothing else. You understand? When I drove back to the city this afternoon, did someone come to the house? Did any of you leave? Tell me true. He never came any closer than the doorway, keeping the gun on me the entire time. Nothing happened. I was too upset to think clearly, unable to take it all in. My mother told him we never left the house, didn't she? Why had she lied? Was Dad gonna hurt me if he found out? I glanced at the wall beside my room, and he noticed. You heard what we were saying, me and your mom. Of course you did. I didn't reply. I just wiped away the tears and tried to hold back any more. It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you, baby. The barrel lowered. I could see his eyes were red where he'd been crying. This was hurting him, I realized. Doing this was hurting him. I just need you to tell me the truth. This is very important, Evie. What did you do today? Did you go out? I was just a child, overwhelmed and confused. Every time in my life I'd been frightened, I would run to my dad. Every time I needed someone, I could call his name and he'd be there. Now he was the one I was scared of, and I was lost. I started to get out of bed to go to him, but he pulled back, the gun snapping up. No! He pointed the weapon right at me. Stay where you are. Don't move. Back on the bed. There was a pleading in his eyes and voice. Please, Evie, don't make me. I had never seen him angry and emotional like this. Never in my life. He'd never even shouted at me before. He just wasn't that type of man. Evie, tell me right now, did any of you leave the house today? Yes. I saw it hit him. This truth, like a physical blow, sapping the strength from his body. He took a faltered step back and leaned against the doorframe, face paling to ghost white, a sharp intake of breath through his clenched teeth. We went to the village. I kept talking, not knowing what else to do. I couldn't stop the words once they had started. All of us, we got separated at the shop, and Mom got angry. Maria, she ran off to see the horses. There were horses in one of the open fields. I went after her, but she wouldn't come back. Mom and Ryan had to help till we found her. I remember that afternoon, chasing my sister down stone side streets under the gray sky. We were just going for a walk. Mom had told us to get out of the house for an hour. She had said, handing us our coats, but remember, don't tell your dad. She laughed, and Ryan did too. Dad was being silly, we thought. The four of us took a winding path through the trees and across the fields of wet grass until we reached the village. A church, a shop, and a dozen homes. We found everything closed and silent. I didn't see a single other person, not even a face at a window or a passing car. Maybe no one lives here anymore, Ryan said. Mom didn't say anything. When Maria ran off, I followed, but I couldn't make her come back on her own. I went for my mom and brother. When I found Maria the second time, we all came home. Nothing happened. How long were you all separated? My father's words were cold now, flat and emotionless. How long were you on your own? I don't know. How long, Evie? 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. He wasn't looking at me anymore, just staring at the floor. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand and backed into the hall. Daddy, where's Ryan? He glanced up, our eyes meeting, and I'd never seen hurt on his face like I did then. But he didn't answer me, just swung the door closed and locked it. A minute or so passed, and I could hear him pacing the floor, steps interspersed with cries from my mother, which he ignored. Then his voice, just outside my room. Evie, I need you to stay here for a little while, baby. Stay away from this door. I'll be back soon, okay? There was a second pause, and then, I love you. I heard him go to my sister's room. He spoke to her briefly through the door, then he headed upstairs. My mom kept shouting, calling his name as the footsteps receded. I hadn't even moved since he left, just sat there on the bed, cracked and hollowed out. "Evie?" My mom's voice came from the next room. I went to the wall and knelt down, pressing my ear against it. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" "I'm okay, Mom. Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby, no, of course not. I'm gonna get us out of here, okay? It's gonna be all right. He won't hurt you. I won't let him hurt you. Your dad, he just isn't feeling well. He isn't himself. We'll get help. It's gonna be okay. I promise." I could hear footsteps on the stairs again, and my mom moved away from the wall. The rattle of keys and the door of her room opened. I stayed where I was, still and listening. "Get back to the window, Lisa." My father's voice was colder than before, dead and hardened. "I told you not to go out. Why'd you lie to me?" "You were pointing that gun at me." She didn't cry anymore. Her words were clear and angry. "I was scared. I didn't know what you would do if I told you. I didn't know what to say. I'd seen our..." "Stop. Tell me what happened today." "We went out, like Evie told you. We went for a walk, David. A grown woman and her children went out for a walk. We're not prisoners, are we? We're not..." "I asked you not to. I've never asked anything of you since we've been together." His voice strained, cracking as he spoke. I've never asked you to do anything for me, change anything for me, not ever. It was just this once I needed you to trust me. One time, follow the rules I gave you." "Why, David, why? You order your family to follow these stupid rules, but you won't explain why. We thought you were losing your mind. All of us did. You've been so strange since we got here. You won't tell me anything. I'm your wife. You act like I'm some idiot who can't be told the truth." "Shut up." His reply was so loud and sudden that I pulled away from the wall. "You don't have any idea. No idea what you've done." "Then tell me." Her voice changed, pleading, understanding. "Tell me what's going on. You can tell me, David. We can..." "Stop it. Stop changing the subject. What happened today in the village?" "Nothing, David. Nothing happened. We went to the local shop, but it was closed. Walking in the..." "You got split up, the four of you." "Maria ran off. Was gone for 2 seconds, David. You know what she's like. She ran off and Evie went after her. When she couldn't catch her, we split up and found her." Something clattered on the floor. "Put 'em on. There's a metal bar underneath the window. Around that." "Are you serious?" "Do it, Lisa." I heard her moving, then the sound of a chain followed by a metallic snap. She started to speak again, but he was already leaving, locking the door behind him. He went to Maria, and a few minutes passed, voices too quiet to understand. I thought I heard Maria crying, but I couldn't make out any words. I was too afraid to move closer to listen. Then more footsteps. "Evie, can you hear me?" "Yes." My voice wavered, coming out as a broken whisper. "I need you to stand away from the door. Back at the window, baby, okay? I'm gonna come in, but I need you to stand there. Do you understand?" Uh-huh. "Speak properly, Evie. Say you understand. This is important." I understand." "Do it now, honey." I scrambled over to the glass on all fours and put my back against the ledge. For a second, I saw the keyhole go dark and realized he was looking through it. Then the door unlocked, and he came in, gun still raised and pointed at me. He had a pistol now as well. I caught a glimpse of it under his shirt, tucked into his belt. His other hand held a pair of handcuffs. He tossed them on the floor, and they skidded to my feet. "The metal bar behind you, Evie, under the window. Put the cuffs around that bar, then clip them on your wrist." I nodded, picking them up and trying to do as he asked. "You have to trust me, baby, okay? I've always protected you, haven't I? Always. I need you to trust me." The handcuffs clicked into place, and I tightened them as he instructed. Then he backed out again and was gone. Through the window, a full moon flashed beneath the clouds. My breath steamed the glass, and the metal of the cuffs were cold on my skin. All I could do was wait. That house was unusual in many ways, not simply its isolation or my father's fear. Some of these things were small details I didn't pick up at first or thought nothing of, but not all. With the exception of my parents' room, every door was thick, heavy, and locked with a key. The only difference in their door was having no key, just a iron latch on the inside. As for the windows, none could be opened from either side, not on any floor. Those metal bars that he put the cuffs around could be found under every one of those windows. The basement was filled with dusty, battered books we weren't allowed to read, and moldy boxes we weren't allowed to look at. Then there was the attic. My brother had gotten a look inside before Dad sent him back downstairs. It was filled with weapons, Ryan had told me. Old rifles and pistols and crossbows, marked and faded with rust and wear. Every part of the house seemed to be wasting away, decaying like a carcass stripped of its bones. It felt like somewhere you hid from life, not somewhere you lived. There was a story there only my father knew, and it was a story he would never tell. When he returned, he went to my mother first. I shuffled as close to the wall as I could to listen. I've checked every part of this house to be certain. No one else is in here. No one else could have gotten in. It's impossible. That's how this place was built. I know that as well as anyone. I survived here for 16 years. My mother's reply was quiet, barely audible. You're sick, David. You need help. All of this, it's insane. What are you doing here to me, to your family, to our girls, our son, Ryan, our son, David? This is insane. Whoever's done it is in this house, Lisa. You understand that, don't you? Do you get that? He went on as if he hadn't heard her. One of the four of us. Could be you, you see. Could be you who... Well, we'll find out when the sun comes up. What are you talking about? Please, David, please. I couldn't have told you. You would have thought I was crazy. You'd have taken the kids. I tried to stay away from this place, but you wouldn't listen. Didn't leave me any choice, did you? I should have known better. I did know better, but I still made the wrong decision. I could hear the waver in his speech, the grief and the pain and desperation. David, they aren't like people think, he snapped, suddenly cutting her off. They're patient. Easier to stop in some ways. Much, much harder in others. They need to get you alone. We're safe when we're inside or together, you see. Should never be alone. Especially not outside. He paused for a moment, and I pressed close to the wall. The wounds don't even show. I know that. I remember that. So you can't tell. Sometimes they don't even know what they are, Lisa. Like two minds in one body. Like a parasite inside, waiting for a chance. David. His words were calm and focused. Listen to me. I don't understand what you're saying. I can't understand. But we can help. Please, whatever it is, whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Put down the gun. Let's go and call for help. We can go home. We can... No, it's too late for that. It's much too late. If you'd done what I asked, just done what I asked, it wouldn't have to be this way. But you never listened to me. Never. I heard movement then, and the door locked again. He went to my sister's room, and a minute later, he came to see me. He was pale, soaked in sweat, bottom lip cracked and bleeding. Evie, I have to do this, honey, okay? To keep you safe, to keep us all safe. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry, but we have to do this. They can hide away from the crosses and questions, but the light always hurts them, at least a little. So then we'll know. I think I must have slept eventually. The sound of my father pacing the halls, the occasional shouts of my mother, they all faded as the empty hours passed. I used my feet to pull down the cover and pull it around me as best I could. I thought about my brother. Was he hurt? Mom had wanted to call the police, call an ambulance. Why wouldn't Dad do that? What had happened? Ryan couldn't be dead. No, not my brother. He couldn't be. I watched the forest through the dark windows, its glass now touched with frost. Watched for so long, I didn't know if I was awake or in a dream. The wind sighed and moved, and the shadows followed. And those dark shapes between the trees could have been figures or branches, or nothing at all. Morning was close. As the hours passed, I thought I could hear scraping sounds from Mom's room, very faint, only growing louder when my father was downstairs to use the toilet. When he returned, she began shouting at him again, loud and suddenly. He ignored her for a minute, then, realizing she wasn't going to stop, strode to her room. I heard the lock turn and the creak of hinges. Then it began. Rapid footsteps, followed by a cry, something striking flesh and a person falling, or more than one. My mother cursed, and metal hit the floor. I had sat up, every muscle tensed. I could hear her breathing heavily, moving around the room, lifting and dragging a heavy something. In a second, she was at my door, unlocking it and pulling it open, saying my name. She had the shotgun under one arm, the keys in her hand. She took off my cuffs. Then we were moving together to my sister's room. As I waited for her to open the door, I looked into Ryan's room. My father was on the floor, blood flowing from an ugly wound on the side of his head. Beside him lay the metal bar from under the window frame. I could see the holes in the plaster where my mother had worked it out during the night. He groaned and grabbed my mother's arm to warn her. "Shit!" she cursed as she stepped past me. Then she pulled the door closed and locked it. A minute later, we had my sister and were heading downstairs. As we reached the steps, I heard my father calling our names and slamming against the door. We didn't stop, taking the stairs as fast as we could, clinging to each other. As we reached the ground floor, my mother gave a hard intake of breath and pulled us both towards her, turning our faces away from whatever was there. Another slam came from above us, my father's cries echoing down the stairwell. "Close your eyes for me, both of you. Hold on to me and we'll go together. Keep 'em closed. Don't open 'em till we get out, okay? Don't look." We stumbled down those final steps as she held us, guiding us forward. A crash from above made me flinch, but we kept moving. "Go on, almost there." We were in the lounge when I looked again. I saw the hallway to the front door, broke into a run, letting go of my mother's arm. Almost there, I thought. I didn't realize how quiet it had gotten until I stopped. The sounds of movement, my mother's voice, the shouts from above, it was all gone. I turned and found myself alone. "Mom? Maria?" I started to walk back. I couldn't imagine going without them. "Mom!" I called. Then I saw them, laying together on the ground, Mom pale and motionless on her back. Maria was crouched over her, her face buried against her neck. My sister looked at me and smiled, teeth and lips black with blood. There was a ragged wound on my mom's throat. A gunshot rang out, a sudden thunder in the cold silence. Maria's body spun and fell across my mom, a thin trail of blood raining down across the dusty floor. I cried out, but I was frozen in place, too shaken and frightened to move. I could see my father swaying, blood in his hair and on his clothes, pistol in his hand, still aimed at my sister's body. Then she started to get up. Her tiny frame rose in jerks, unnatural movements, more like a broken puppet than the girl I'd known. She made it to her feet and turned towards him, her head hanging bloody and limp, still smiling, though. "Daddy." He fired again, and the bullet struck her in the chest, knocking her back to the ground. I scrambled away into a corner, eyes closed and ears covered. Another shot. Then another. For a few minutes, there was nothing but the dark and my heart beating, flashing images that I couldn't push away. When I opened my eyes and took my hands away from my ears, it was over. My father walked towards the still body of his wife and youngest child. His feet dragged, arms hanging limp at his side. The gun fell from his hands and clattered across the wooden floor. He seemed to collapse as he went, falling down to them, making only wordless sounds of loss. I watched him there in the weak light, shaking and weeping over them, over the ruins of his life, broken and emptied of everything but grief. A pain for which no words would suffice. I don't remember getting up, walking to him. I touched his arm, and he saw me at last and pulled me close. The stench of sweat and blood and horror ran across us both, a wound that could never heal, only fester and burn. Outside, the sun was rising. I loved my father, even there at the end. He tried so hard to protect us, to keep us safe. But when humans are afraid, they miss the simplest things. They make mistakes, like thinking my sister was the only one. There are a few places you know where you shouldn't bleed, I'm sure. Shark-infested waters, anywhere in bear country, and in polite company. Sure, but you're forgetting the Midwest. It's pretty much bred into us, even though we don't see it directly when growing up. You come back inside for dinner when the bell rings, or Mom screams bloody murder over whatever game you're playing in the woods or the corn. If your parents are generous, you can go out after dark and catch fireflies. But make sure you wear your shoes. Don't go too close to the woods, or a branch might poke your eye out. All that sort of talk. What they don't tell you, or even usually know in earnest, is that you shouldn't bleed after dark. It's not the predators, mind you. The worst we have here are coyotes, and they're usually more afraid of you than you are of them. Usually, there's a few examples of kids being ripped apart by then, but those rarely reach the news because something else is actually to blame. A satanic ritual where the kids rip the child in question apart, while their own tears stream in fat rivulets, while their friends screamed for mercy and their parents listened horrified, but understandingly from a balcony not a quarter-mile away. The parents never blamed the children for what they had done to survive in this place. Something made them know that it had to be done. You see, the land once belonged to the natives. They walked this land and knew its habits and its hungers. They knew how to appease it, how to placate it long enough so that its hunger wouldn't consume them whole. The white men came barreling in here thinking they knew how to appease it, and ironically, we accidentally did. Pig farms, you see, generate a lot of blood that must be drained, and this blood might as well be processed into fertilizer. This blood placates the soil here, which hungers for a blood of any type. It's a good source of nitrogen, some farmers say, but the old farmers, more gristle than muscle, remember what it really is. It's a sacrifice to the land. So, let me tell you a story from my childhood as to why you should never bleed after dark in the Midwest. I was 13, my cousin Zach was 14, and my friend was about the same age. My mom let us go collect fireflies after dark, which is harmless enough. The land is usually quite respectful of property, and my mother, like her mother's mother, buried those witch bottles filled with piss after childbirth, with nails and broken glass around the edges of the property to demarcate the family domain. It's hollowed the ground, though our ignorant children's minds didn't register her declaration that we were only safe on family property. My cousin Zach was the one to dare us into the field beyond the farm. I knew better, or at least I should have, but after a triple dog dare, the most sacred of all dares, I went first into the cutting dry corn husks of late September. I felt them scratch me as I ran into the forest of uniform corn stalks. Despite the minuscule pain, I giggled, knowing that I was breaking one of my mother's biggest rules: do not enter the cornfield after dark, or you'll get lost. I was a smart kid, and I knew this because everyone told me so I figured I could find my way back. The moon was high, and if I just headed away from it, then I'd be fine. I heard my friends come charging in behind me, laughing and scrambling through the razor-sharp corn, but not quite behind me. I looked down at my arms and saw tiny slightly bloody scratches along them, and could only imagine that I had them on my shins and face as well. The worst cut was on my left outside wrist, and I caught the sight of the first rivulet of blood falling, almost in slow motion, as it fell to the dry and thirsty soil below me. Even in the moonlight, I could see that was where the blood had hit the soil, cratering it. The soil around it darkened dramatically, as if I poured a bottle of water into it, and the soil, the best I can describe it, is that it drank me in. It knew me now. My blood ran cold, and I shouted out to my friends and to Zach that I thought we should leave. As the purple vines began spilling up from that first drop, it became an existential fear in me. I bolted back the way I'd come. I know I was only a dozen rows or so inside the field, but as I ran and ran, I quickly became aware that either I was running in the wrong direction, or that suddenly direction was meaningless. The soil had tasted my blood, and it would have me. I'll spare you the details, but give you the highlights and let you fill in the rest. I'm sure that whatever you imagine is only half as awful as what I saw that night. First, I came across Zach. He was bleeding all over from faint scratches that bled more than they had any right to do, and I knew that the land would never let him leave. He had stripped off his bloody long-sleeve shirt to inspect where exactly he was bleeding from. He was more perplexed than anything, and obliviously told me that I had lost the game of hide-and-seek, since he was the seeker. I put on his blood-soaked shirt and sprinted through the corn, the sound of him screaming to come back here in anger, followed by the shrieking pain he must have felt as the husk ripped his skin from him with every step. It'll haunt me forever. Despite himself, he couldn't help but follow the blood on his shirt until every piece of him was skinned away by the blades we ran through. Next, my best friend. I keep his name a secret so as to keep him safe, but I found him digging a hole to escape the sharp edges around him. I told him to stop digging because the very soil below him wanted him. That's what my mom used to say, anyway. He curled into a ball, afraid to move an inch, lest one of the stalks come closer to him. I told him I'd get help and to stay as still as he could. Lastly, I saw a glowing flame. I ran towards it, my cousin's long-sleeve shirt protecting me from the lashing leaves and jagged soil when I tripped. Blood still dripped from painless razor cuts all across me, but not as badly as Zach. When I arrived, my mom was already gone. She sat there on her knees, holding something I can only hope was not a baby, smoldering amidst a circle of burning corn stalks that seemed to never run out of fuel. My throat was choked with the scent of my mother's burning hair, and my eyes streamed with both the smoke and my abysmal feeling of loss and loneliness. I ran, and I awoke my father when I broke through the forest of corn, screaming bloody murder. My mother was dead, my cousin was bleeding, and my best friend was hiding in a hole. At the end of it, my mother was proclaimed missing, though everyone in town showed it in their eyes that they both pitied me and respected my mother's sacrifice. My best friend was committed to an institute for a while, and we fell apart, but he lived. My cousin, on the other hand, was, according to the news, ripped apart by coyotes. So, thus the whole county went hunting for coyotes, shooting them dead, burning them, leaving them to rot. Do you see what I mean? Zach and my mother were only pawns in the end. The land got the blood of 1,000 coyotes out of this little adventure, but one problem remains. Despite my mother's knowledge of the old ways, the land remembers my taste. I was driving back home to see my dad after years away from this awful place. I hit a pothole the size of Kansas that took my front tire clean off. My phone calls and texts won't go through. My phone's been at 23% for entirely too long. It has easily been days, but nothing has changed. The sky is still black, The moon is the same as it had been when I left years ago. The clock hasn't moved an inch, but I know only how long it's been because of sleep, hunger, and thirst. I've a middling understanding of tech, and I've wrote a script to post this message once my laptop gets signal again. The corn grows so close to these roads, and only seems to grow closer the further down the road I look. It will know my taste again. I'm coming, Zach. If you get this message, friend, know that this country knows your taste, and you are more than welcome to come here and feed it. Run away to the desert. It's not safe to bleed here. I always knew there was some aspect of my life that was cursed. I tried to be reasonable about it, just assuming that I was making bad decisions. But there's only so much tragedy one can take as misfortune. I had more than my fair share in the past 20 years. It started with the birth of my son, David. His mother, Camilla, the love of my life, she became a shell. After giving birth to David, something happened in her mind. Something broke. She lost the ability to speak instantly, and as years went by, she slowly forgot how to do many things. How to drive, how to read, how to dress herself, until she was finally stuck in a wheelchair. I say forgot because there was nothing wrong with her body. According to our doctors, her nerves, her organs, her muscles, everything was in perfect order. It was all just her mind. It was unlearning all that she learned since she was born. Memories and personalities took much longer to go. I could tell from the tears that she sometimes cried. When they stopped, I knew Camilla was mentally gone. That took about 10 years. It was enough to break me, but I didn't have the luxury of curling up into a fetal position and melting into a puddle for long. I had a son to raise. From day one, David was perfect. David could do no wrong in any aspect of his life. Incredibly intelligent, progressing faster in school than any of his classmates. It was nothing newsworthy. There had been greater child prodigies, but I think he was just holding back. He had this spark in his eye when confronted with a problem. It was a confidence and a hint of amusement that told me that he had the answer already. As for his behavior at home, he was a pillar of the family. No father should ever have to lean on his son so early in life, but that's what I did. He was a rock. That's why I never got in his way when he wanted to do something. I let him do as he pleased because I had no reason to doubt that he could look after himself. I expected some kind of ego to develop. I expected David to take advantage of me and my weak parenting, but he never did. David graduated from university at 18 and found a job almost immediately, thanks to some connections with other students. He was sending money home every month to pay for a caregiver who would look after Camilla. The caregiver being an ex-professor from his university. I assumed she was getting more money than what she was earning at the school. All those years, since the moment he could more or less look after himself, I heard the phrase, "Thank God you have David," from everyone who knew our family situation. You might even be thinking that right now, while reading this. Yet, I could never quite share that feeling. Without any real reason, I wasn't as happy with David as others were. He intimidated the hell out of me. He had this way of looking at me, reaching out with love, and even as his father, I could never make that connection. I couldn't even bring myself to like him. My son treated me better than any son had ever treated his father, and in my heart I felt the same way about him as I do about strangers I pass in an alleyway. I just wanted to keep my distance. That good he brought into my life should have helped me balance things out just a little bit, but tragedy always found me. I lost family. I lost friends. I watched my colleagues betray me and my work crumble. Even my pets didn't last long, so I stopped getting them. And although I never told anyone, I started to feel the reason for all of it was David. In my head, as damaged as it was, I blamed him. Not just for Camilla, but for everything. Everything. To see him leave the house was probably the happiest I'd been in a long time. That is until that caregiver he sent arrived, a month or so later. "Hi, Mr. Samuels," she said, walking into the house. "My name's Lilith Evans. I know your son, David." She shook my hand with a smile. My heart just about popped out of my chest when I saw her, this beautiful woman. I went cold again when she mentioned David. She didn't falter in her enthusiasm. Lilith explained why she was there, tears in her eyes when she spoke about how kind and amazing David was to care about his ailing mother. I don't think I said a word to her in our first meeting. I was too shocked, giving her hums and nods. I did speak to her the next day, but it was like speaking to David. I just ended up bending in her favor, letting her do what she would, taking care of Camilla and leaving me to my work. She had the same eyes as David, pouring with kindness, but for me, lacking any soul. I decided to give her the same treatment and just stay out of her way. "Mr. Samuels, we're leaving," she called to me from the front door. "Okay," I called just before she shut the door. Alone, Lilith was taking Camilla on a walk and had been doing so every day for the last 2 years. It hurt to say it like that, taking her for a walk, as if she was an animal to be looked after. Even now, with bitterness towards myself, I can't help but think it was a waste anyway. I focused on my work, and when I finished, I turned to the TV. It was good at distracting me and getting me away from my problems, from my feelings. I could go on a whole day feeling nothing, while something inside of me was begging to be resolved. I ignored it even then, staring at the mouths of actors I didn't know, trying to see how fake they were. I fell asleep. I woke up later, much later. The sun had settled and the room was dark. I had only the light from the TV to help me spot the furniture. Without a single question going through my mind, I went through the house, closing curtains, checking windows, locking doors. I grabbed a glass of water in the kitchen. I rubbed my eyes for too long, the light hurting them, so I just turned them all off. I would feel my way upstairs to the bedroom. There was a rail on one side of the stairs where Camilla's chairlift was mounted. My fingers traced along it. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what. Trudging into the bedroom, I saw my unmade bed in the nightlight coming from the window. The cool blue spoke to my heart, and I fell onto the sheets. It was perfect. I knew I could only enjoy it for a moment. I had to get dressed and close the curtains, but I argued with myself before I finally got up. The window gave me a clear view of the backyard, the adjacent lake, and, of course, the woods. I saw the neighbor's swing set moving slightly in the breeze. Not squeaking, thankfully. I had snuck over one night and oiled the chains. A light flickered among the trees. I looked at it, wanting to see something. A beam of light, a flashlight. It turned away and continued deeper into the woods, though. I thought it was more than likely my other neighbor's, going after his dog again. It tended to escape, and I closed the curtains. When I turned around, I saw that the door to Camilla's bedroom across from mine was still open. Her wheelchair wasn't in the corner of the room, and Lilith usually closed it after putting Camilla to bed. I then realized what was wrong when I climbed the stairs. The chairlift was at the bottom. Lilith hadn't returned with Camilla after her walk. I immediately called Lilith's phone, but she didn't pick up. The phone would keep ringing, only to time out. That left only David. He picked up almost immediately. "David, Lilith hasn't come back with Camilla," I told him. "Mom's here with me. I wanted to see her. Did Lilith tell you this afternoon?" I was asleep, I stuttered, remembering telling Lilith not to wake me up when I was napping. Maybe she left me a note. I'm sorry. Why did you want to see your mother? He could tell I was tense, even though Camilla was mostly gone in my eyes. I still cared enough about her memory to want her to be safe. Relax. I just wanted to, David explained in a calm voice. I haven't seen either of you in 2 years. Just wanted to see Mom and Lilith while driving through the neighborhood. Where in town? Oh, Lionel Street, I think. No, where are you staying? David gave me the address of a motel and told me he would come around in the morning if I was available. Of course, I said I was, and we ended the call shortly after that. I sat down at the end of my bed, fell back, and was asleep as my head hit the sheets. Looking back, I was stressed. David was back. How's Aunt Grace? David asked from the other side of the table. He held a cup of coffee with both hands as if warming them. He had a kind smile. She passed away shortly after her husband, I said. I tried not to think about losing my sister. About a week after you left. I said that last sentence with a little too much anger, but I tried to pass it off as sadness. David looked down, his face painted with concern. After a long moment, I finished my coffee, and David looked up again. His black hair had grown into flowing waves around his chiseled face. I liked her, he said. I mumbled. Where's Camilla? Lilith is looking after her. Dad, David sighed. Do you want to see her? Do you want Lilith to bring her here? I just want to know where she is. Where else would she be? It was a simple question. David was being reasonable. I just didn't like his attitude. Seeing him again put me on edge. Looking at him, I couldn't find a single fault. He had grown into a handsome young man, but he looked nothing like me. I didn't see any of my weakness in him. Why are you back in town? Problems at work? No, work is good, David sighed again. Speaking of work, I'll come back another time with Mom. You still have those meetings every Thursday, right? I nodded. Okay, I'll leave you to it then. David got up and left. I didn't follow. I listened to his footsteps and heard him close the front door. I let out a breath, something I'd been holding in longer than I felt I knew. My heart was pounding. I picked up my empty coffee cup and put it in the sink. I then walked over to grab David's. The cup was still scalding hot. I hissed and wiped my fingers. It had been over half an hour since I poured it, and it still hadn't cooled down. I dumped the hot contents and rinsed the cup out angrily. There was always something to send me over the edge. I ended up taking that cup out of the sink and throwing it as hard as I could into the trash, wanting it to break, but some other trash cushioned the fall. I spent the whole day staring at a whiteboard and a ream of paper on my desk. Markers were at hand. I needed to write something on the board, but I was too distracted. Being stuck in my head, I couldn't help but play out the talk I'd had with David. No matter which way I looked at it, I couldn't help but see myself as an asshole. I didn't really care about Camilla. I was happy seeing my son, and damn it, I respected him enough for sensing my discomfort and leaving when he did. What the hell is wrong with me? I murmured. Seriously, I blinked and it was night again. I put the marker down and made my rounds. Curtains, windows, doors, finally ending up in my bedroom. I looked out at the lake. The swings were squeaking again. A breeze rustled the trees more than it disturbed the lake. I heard the familiar pitter-patter of droplets hitting the earth outside. Rain? Where are the clouds? I said to myself, looking up at the sky. I could see the stars. No rain on my house, and not a droplet hit my face, but I heard rain nonetheless. I looked down at the ground, but I couldn't see anything. Out of curiosity, but mostly escaping my own thoughts, I marched downstairs, seeing as I was already dressed, and opened the kitchen door to the backyard. The sound of rain was closer, but when I pointed my phone light at the ground, I didn't see anything. I then listened closer and realized the sound was coming from the nearby trees. It didn't sound like leaves. There was no way I was confusing the two. I walked over to the tree and was almost immediately soaked in water. I stepped back out of the downpour and turned on my phone light again. From the branches and the leaves, rain fell thick and fast. It pooled on the ground and soaked into the earth. The sight of it left me silent and thoughtless. When seeing something that just didn't make any sense, my mind struggled to try to make sense of it. What snapped me out of it was the sound my ears picked up amongst the patter. Crying, weeping, coming from the tree, so low and pathetic. It was the kind of moaning sob that only those who were grieving could make. It was how I cried the many nights that followed Camilla's degradation. Only that was a long time ago. Yet the thought of Camilla seemed to get the cogs in my mind moving again. I looked down at my phone and wiped a few stray droplets from the screen, hovering over David's number. I wanted to call him, but I knew no matter what he said, I would just want the call to end. Instead, I turned back to the house. The weeping followed me as I entered. Even when the sounds of the drops faded, those cries echoed. I got into my car and drove off the property, heading to the motel David was staying at. It probably sounded hypocritical for caring all of a sudden, but if you were confronted with trees that sounded like you in a moment where your heart was breaking, going to Camilla was the best thing on my mind. Arriving at the motel, I saw a few cars parked out front. One room had the lights on. I heard the TV playing through the thin walls. I could understand that. For some people, it was the only way they could get to sleep. I saw David's silver 4-door parked in front of one of the dark rooms, so I assumed that it had to be his. Definitely not the best place to be looking after one's ailing mother, but I didn't care to question it until I was standing in front of the motel. I wanted to call Lilith and ask her what she was thinking leaving Camilla with David in such a place. But then I noticed her car was there as well. It made me angry. With a sudden wave of responsibility for my wife washing over me, I marched up to the door and thumped it with the meat of my hand. "David, it's me. Let me in, or..." "Jeremy?" It shattered everything inside of me. My heart felt so hollow that I thought it might collapse in on itself. My bones were glass, cracking under the weight of my flesh. I stepped back from the door and it opened. The light was on inside. Camilla was standing in the doorway, her body frail and skinny. Her eyes were wide and scared. I knew her body had wasted away, but it seemed to be less saddening when she was in a wheelchair. When she was standing and moving, she looked like a starving prisoner. Yet, I was the one who buckled first. She took a shaky step towards me and fell forward. I caught her in my arms and held her against me. She was so light. A bony hand reached up and touched the side of my head as I cried into her shoulder. As her fingertips graced my skin, there was a cold plunge and a sudden fall. It was the same sensation of suddenly falling into a dream and waking up. Only this time I was soaked in rain, kneeling in front of a dark, empty motel room. The door was open. Blood had stained the doorway. I was breathing with a burst of adrenaline. I was in danger, or at least I was a moment ago. I stood up quickly and stepped into the motel room. There was blood on the bed, the walls, the curtains. I could see the dark shapes of bodies on the ground and an empty wheelchair in the corner. I stepped out, unable to investigate any further. When I had the stomach for it, I trudged over to reception. I had to make a call. Camilla and Lilith's bodies were covered and carted away. Camilla was untouched, not a scratch on her. Same could not be said for Lilith. Her body was mutilated beyond recognition, but her wallet and car remained in the parking lot. It was safe to assume that it was her. David is the prime suspect in the investigation, although I don't hold much hope for that. It's only because I said so that he's being investigated at all, but the receptionist reports a different name, a different man entirely, renting that room at the motel. There was no record of David returning to town. Nobody to say he wasn't either, though. Lilith was the only real connection, but there was a problem with that as well. There was no transfer of money into her account from David, or anyone. She was a professor at his university, but he never took her class. Nobody there had ever seen the two of them speak. From the outside, it looked like a random person was playing caregiver for my wife, and I just went along with it. I didn't say anything about what I had seen before finding the bodies. I haven't told them about the ill feelings I had towards my son. It's better to leave as much of the unexplained out of my statement. Yet, I believe, since no one has found a reasonable explanation for what happened, mine is the only one that matters. Mine is the only one that pieces things together, that confirms the fears I have regarding my son. That there's something wrong with him. That he isn't the kind of man everyone thinks he is. Only, I'm too old, too afraid to do anything about it. I haven't had any communication with David since. I retired from my job last year, and I live alone. Waking up in the cozy lodge on Mount Laurenite, I eagerly embraced a day of skiing. The slopes offered a thrilling adventure, with powdery snow and stunning vistas. After a lively day on the mountain, I joined fellow skiers at the lodge cafe, sharing stories by the fireplace. Exploring the lodge's amenities revealed a spa and a charming library. The evening brought a gourmet dinner, and I ended the day stargazing on the deck. The perfect blend of adventure and relaxation made my first day on Mount Laurenite unforgettable. As night fell on the lodge, an eerie symphony of crashing trees and inhuman screeches filled the air. The lodge's deck offered a haunting view of the turmoil in the forest, with unsettling sounds emanating from a nearly 7-foot cliff face. Inside, guests exchanged uneasy glances, seeking refuge in the lodge's warmth. The staff reassured us, attributing the unsettling noises to natural forces. Despite the mysterious backdrop, the lodge maintained its comfortable ambience. As I settled into my room, the unsettling sounds persisted, creating a restless atmosphere. The night at the lodge unfolded as a surreal blend of awe and unease, leaving unanswered questions lingering in the mountain air. In the dim moonlight on the lodge's deck, the unsettling symphony of sounds reached a chilling climax, intrigued by the mysterious commotion, a cacophony peering into the night. Suddenly, a grotesque creature emerged from the shadows, its form illuminated in the moon's eerie glow. The creature stood tall, its silhouette a nightmarish amalgamation of sinew, limbs, and gnarled features. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, capturing the darkness within its twisted form. Jagged spines adorned its back, casting ominous shadows as it moved. The creature noticed me on the balcony, its screech intensifying, sending shivers down my spine. The sound was a blend of anguish and malevolence, echoing through the mountainous terrain. The creature's movements were unsettlingly agile, each step accompanied by a disturbing contortion of its twisted anatomy. Its skin, if one could call it that, appeared mottled and scarred, revealing a history of unknown horrors. The creature's elongated limbs terminated in claws that seemed capable of tearing through anything in its path. The air was thick with an acrid scent as the creature approached, revealing its predatory intent. Frozen in terror, I watched as the creature locked eyes with me, its gaze penetrating the veil between reality and nightmare. The balcony became a stage for a macabre dance, the creature's screeches and my pounding heart forming an eerie duet. As the night unfolded, the lodge's once comforting ambience transformed into an unsettling refuge. The creature's presence lingered in the shadows, leaving an indelible mark on the night at Mount Lauronite's lodge. The symphony of the mountain had taken a dark turn, and the creature's haunting visage remained etched in my memory. The grotesque creature, its form twisted and nightmarish, abruptly broke into a demonic sprint towards me on the balcony. Its movements were a blur as it closed the distance with terrifying speed. Panic surged through me as the creature, fueled by an unknown malevolence, slammed its full weight into the cabin door, shaking the structure with each furious impact. The door strained under the relentless assault, groaning as if resisting the intrusion of forces beyond comprehension. Fear clenched my chest as I braced against the balcony railing, the creature's screeches now replaced by the thunderous crashes against the door. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the cacophony ceased, a haunting silence enveloping the lodge, leaving only the echoing resonance of the creature's last impact against the door. Uncertainty hung in the air as I continually surveyed the surroundings. Just as a false sense of relief settled in, a chilling tapping commenced. It was rhythmic and deliberate, echoing from every window of the lodge. The creature, it seemed, had shifted its focus to finding another entry point. The taps were like morbid percussion, creating a suspenseful symphony of dread. Each tap felt like a sinister whisper, the creature methodically exploring every inch of the lodge in its pursuit. Shadows danced across the windows as it sought a vulnerability to exploit. The once welcoming lodge now felt like a fortress under siege, its very foundations tested by an otherworldly force. The tapping crescendoed into a nerve-wracking rhythm, intensifying the suspense. I stood paralyzed, caught in the heart of the pounding climax of the surreal encounter. The night at Mount Lauronite Lodge had evolved into a harrowing struggle, with the creature's relentless pursuit echoing in the haunting symphony of the mountain's mysteries. As the creature relentlessly battered against the cabin door, a haunting familiarity swept over me, transporting my thoughts to a chilling incident from my past. Years ago, I had been caught in a fierce current while swimming too close to a dam. The force was relentless, pulling me under with an unforgiving grip. In those harrowing moments, I felt the icy embrace of imminent doom, the realization sinking in that there was nothing I could do but wait for the inevitable. Miraculously, I had managed to break free, just before the current dragged me into the dam's abyss. The brush with my impending morality left an indelible mark, a visceral understanding of the helplessness that arises when confronted by forces beyond control. It was a moment when the fight-or-flight response faltered, and the stark reality of one's vulnerability took center stage. Now, on the lodge's balcony, as the grotesque creature relentlessly tried to find a way in with brute force, that same sense of impending doom resurfaced. The cabin, my supposed refuge, felt like a sinking vessel in a stormy sea, each impact of the creature's assault echoing the relentless pull of that dam's current. Helplessly gripping the balcony rail, the feeling of impending doom intensified. The creature's unrelenting determination mirrored the inexorable force of that damn current. Fight or flight, both were futile, and the cold grip of vulnerability settled in, much like that moment when I was caught in the merciless current. As the creature abruptly fell silent, the lodge became a crucible of anticipation. The tapping on the windows, reminiscent of that fateful current's pull, evoked a chilling déjà vu. In those suspenseful seconds, I stood paralyzed, entwined with the echoes of past helplessness, bracing for the unknown as the creature sought entry. The night at Mount Lauronite Lodge had become a surreal tapestry where past and present converged in a symphony of vulnerability and dread. A split-second decision made me jump from the balcony as I bolted for my skis. The creature realized what I had done and screeched after me. As I descended the mountain, the enraged creature pursued me with relentless fury. Its mutated form oozed grotesque tendrils, and its elongated limbs resembled twisted vines. The once molten eyes now glowed with a sickly radiance, casting a hunting glow across the night. Navigating the treacherous trails and hurtling over snow-covered crevices, the creature closed in with ghastly speed. Each step it took left a trail of mutated, ooze-like substance in the snow, painting a nightmarish picture of its relentless pursuit. Realizing the imminent danger, I accelerated towards the cliff's edge. The creature's screeches intensified, echoing through the mountainous landscape as it closed the gap. Just as its razor-sharp claws slashed at my calf, I slammed my ski poles into the ground with a desperate force. The abrupt stop sent me hurtling forward, my legs dangling over the edge. The creature, unable to halt its momentum, barreled off the cliff with a gut-wrenching screech. Time seemed to slow as the night air filled with the grotesque symphony of the creature's demise. The fall was a descent into a nightmarish finality. The creature, impaled on a shard of rock at the cliff's base, writhed in agony. Its tendrils flailed wildly, leaving a gruesome trail of mutated substance in the snow. The screeches, now distorted and gurgling, filled the air until the mountain fell silent once more. As I caught my breath, the eerie glow from the creature's eyes dimmed, and the mountain embraced a tranquil stillness. A gory tableau at the cliff's base stood as a testament to the night's surreal horror. The once vibrant trail and snow-covered crevice bore witness to the harrowing chase, concluding in the chilling silence that followed the creature's final gory descent into oblivion. Limping back to the lodge, my adrenaline-fueled escape left me in desperate need of medical attention. The once cozy refuge had transformed into a scene of chaos, marked by the aftermath of the creature's rampage. Lodge staff, shaken and bewildered, rushed to assist me, offering the care I desperately needed. As dawn painted the horizon with hues of orange and pink, a surreal turn of events unfolded. Armored vehicles rolled up to the lodge, each marked with the insignia of a black hawk clutching a globe. Men in tactical gear disembarked, a formidable presence against the serene mountain backdrop. The air buzzed with an air of secrecy as they approached, their movements precise and purposeful. They presented a non-disclosure agreement, demanding my signature in exchange for their intervention and aid. The document bore the acronym CSO and showcased a logo depicting a black hawk gripping the earth in its talons. The clandestine nature of the encounter unfolded as I signed the NDA, sealing my silence against the night's bizarre events. The men, presumably from the covert organization represented on the paper, efficiently coordinated with lodge staff. They examined the aftermath, collecting samples and analyzing the mutated residue left by the creature. Their movements spoke of a well-practiced routine, as if such incidents were not as uncommon as one might believe. As the sun emerged, the armored vehicles departed as swiftly as they had arrived, leaving the lodge in an eerie calm. The mountain, now bathed in the warm glow of morning, seemed to conceal the secrets of the night before. The events of that harrowing night remained a closely guarded secret, locked behind the signed NDAs and the enigmatic logo of the CSO. The lodge, once a sanctuary, now bore witness to the convergence of natural mystery and clandestine operations taken out by an organization that navigates the thin line between reality and the supernatural. The drive down the mountain was a journey through the aftermath of a surreal night. The peacefulness of the wilderness road provided a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded only hours earlier. The first light of dawn painted the snow-covered landscape in a soft glow, casting an ethereal aura over the mountain. However, as the roads neared the cliff base, where the creature met its grisly demise, a profound unease settled in. The armored vehicles had left no trace, but the spot where the creature had landed was frozen in time. The mutated residue, a grotesque testament to the creature's violent end, marred the pristine snow. Its visage and the ooze had left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder of the unearthly encounter. A shiver ran down my spine as the road offered a close-up view of the remnants. The creature, once a nightmarish force, was no longer present, yet its essence lingered in the eerie silence. The frozen imprints and shadows in the snow hinted at a grotesque finality that had transpired just hours earlier. Caught in the grip of an uncanny chill, I noticed the creature's shadow seemingly slinking into the woods of Mount Lauronite. Dismissing it as a trick of the mind, I continued the descent, my gaze fixed on the road ahead. The rational part of my mind attributed the fleeting image to fatigue and the lingering effects of a night filled with horror and creatures of myth. As I drove away from the mountain's embrace, the rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold. The tranquility of the morning seemed to wash away the night's ordeal. The creature, the CSO, the enigmatic events of Mount Lauronite faded into the rearview mirror, leaving behind a lingering sense of mystery and the profound realization that some secrets are best left undisturbed in the shadows of the unknown. The worst part about insomnia is the boredom. Nothing's open except for the seedy places. Nobody awake except for the seedy people. Nothing to do except watch movies and eat sunflower seeds. Seriously, screw insomnia. My sleep capacity generally comes and goes in waves, but the few weeks before I found Howell's was especially rough. There was no inciting incident, just that general feeling of restlessness and anxiety that had become a familiar friend over the years. I tried all the standard assists, warm milk, old movies, cut down on my caffeine intake, all the usual things that people recommend, but never really work. Eventually, more out of boredom than anything, I took to taking late-night walks through the city. I worked a crappy job as a projectionist at a local movie theater, and on the weekends I didn't often get off work until the last movie finished, and the city had long since wound down by that time. The first week or two I stayed towards the well-lit areas, populated by the intoxicated, both rich and poor. But while the people watching was always good, I quickly grew tired of the restless noise and began wandering off the beaten path. I'm not sure how I'd never noticed Hal's before. I distinctly remember buying smokes at the dilapidated gas station across the street on several occasions, and I'm sure my eyes would have been drawn to the large storefront window still brightly lit and welcoming at 3 a.m. The neon sign pronounced it Hal's low-cost thrift store and consignment, glowing in garishly conflicting colors, except for the first, which was burnt out. Of course, I would come to realize that there was a very good reason I had never seen it before, but that night I wondered if maybe I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. I entered, of course I did, even if I didn't feel the need to validate that the whole thing wasn't just a figment of my imagination. There was no way I could deny my curiosity. It was probably the smell that I noticed first, kind of a combination of burning sage and rancid meat, but in a weirdly good kind of way. Best thing I can compare it to is the beach bonfires at low tide. The place was packed full of merchandise, all displayed very neatly on row after row of shelves, but without any sign of clear organization. Knickknacks sat on the same shelves as old magazines and jumper cables. A bizarre collection of artwork decorated the walls, from shadow boxes holding sports memorabilia to Pink Floyd posters to copies of famous Impressionist paintings. The wall furthest from the front entrance was actually just an unbroken line of doors, each door crafted into an entirely different style, and each painted a different color to create a full-length pride flag along the wall. In the center, the green door actually appeared to be an elevator, which really just raised additional questions. I began to browse the first aisle to the left of the front door. A full silver-plated dining set, a clown costume, a chainsaw without a chain, 4 cookbooks, a Super Soaker XP100 already filled with water, several fake antique-looking religious relics such as crosses and Buddha heads, and a full-length evening cloak that made me immediately start contemplating a career as a supervillain, if for no better reason than it would look amazing on me. I browsed several more aisles with a bemused smile on my face as the truly eclectic inventory continued to defy any clear organizational sense. That was until a gruff voice cleared its throat. I glanced up to see the shopkeeper behind the front counter staring at me. He was a medium-sized guy, but he held a clear "don't fuck with me" aura about him. His head was shaved bald, and his arms and shoulders indicated someone who had spent more than a few years working in trades. "Can I help you find something?" he asked, his voice a low grumble that ran the line between professionalism and wanting to throw my ass to the curb. I shot him one of my patented disarming smiles. "Not really, just kind of browsing." He continued to stare at me for a moment, his eyes probing as if searching for a way to sort me into one of the Jungilian archetypes that all retail employees have for their customers. "Incubus?" he asked finally. "Excuse me? Are you an incubus?" he responded, his eyes still searching mine. "No, Gemini, actually. Well, on the cusp with Cancer, really. I don't think people actually use the astrology pickup line in real life. I gotta ask, do you get a lot of success with that one? With nostalgia being all the rage these days, going for one of the classic pickup lines is actually a brilliant idea." The corner of the man's mouth twitched just a moment before returning to its painted-on scowl. That immediately put me at ease. Couldn't work the late-night shift without having that hard of a shell as an exterior, but if I could touch a sense of humor, he probably wouldn't be throwing me out anytime soon. "I don't get a lot of people coming in here just to browse," he said, his voice having moved slightly away from the gravelly rumble he was using before. Less Bob Dylan and more Bob's Burgers. "Most know exactly what they want by the time they lay their eyes on the place." I shrugged. "What can I say? I'm an impulsive sort. Hey, how much is this?" I lifted up a snow globe that held what looked like a large hospital. "Good eye," the shopkeeper said, raising an eyebrow. "That's $200. I whistled, immediately placing it carefully back on the rack. "Pricey for a paperweight." collector's item. There are a lot of stories inside that little snow globe. You could probably get a couple of $1,000 for it from the right buyer, if you're fine dealing with that kind of person. I take it since you're selling it for $200, you're not fine with that. The corner of the shopkeeper's mouth twitched again. I could tell he was warming up to me. I'm pretty sure you're not here for that whole thing anyway. What am I here for, then? I'm not sure. Keep browsing. I'm sure you'll find it. I did as I was told. An antique set of writing quills, what looked like a defunct Tesla coil, a compass and a sextant, a typewriter, VCR, a few old board games I'd never heard of, and a few other raggedy children's toys, including an actual Raggedy Ann doll. Nothing really struck my fancy until I was flipping through a rack of clothing and came across a treasure. I delightedly snatched it up and approached the front counter, placing it in front of the shopkeeper. He raised an eyebrow at me, and I beamed a smile at him in return. I've always wanted one of these, I chortled. The shopkeeper shook his head and pressed a few buttons on the archaic register. Not Faye, then. Never met a Faye with a decent sense of humor. For the white t-shirt with "I'm with stupid" written on it, that'll be $1.53. I fished a handful of coins out of my pocket and counted out exact change. He took it and sorted the money into the correct slot. He looked back at me and shook his head. This has got to be the dumbest sale I've made this year. I'm not even sure why that was on the rack. Hey, I'm not complaining, I said, pulling my new purchase over my shirt. Did you just open? I walk by this area pretty often, and I'm sure I've never seen you here before. The man's smile came out fully. Yes and no. We've been in business for a long time, but I guess you could say we're new to the area. Well, I hope you stick around, Hal, I said, nodding with feigned understanding as I extended my hand. You got a bunch of weird stuff in here, and there aren't that many places for me to go shopping this time of night. Butch, the shopkeeper replied, shaking my outstretched hand. My name's Butch, not Hal. What the hell would the owner be doing here behind the counter at 3 a.m.? I threw my head back and laughed. I stand corrected. Butch grinned. So not an incubus, not Faye, not a vamp. The hell are you doing in my shop? He raised an eyebrow. Buying vintage clothing, apparently. No, seriously, what's your deal? You a shapeshifter, a Wendigo, cannibal? Dude, I've worked enough retail to know all about the normal customer archetypes, but I think you've lost me on these. Is a shapeshifter one of those shoplifters who keeps showing up in different clothes like they're actually fooling anyone? Butch looked at me in perplexity, but a little bell rang announcing the arrival of another customer before he could continue his line of questioning. We both glanced towards the door instinctually, and I suddenly also began wondering what the hell I was doing in the store. The woman who had just entered was tall, disturbingly tall. At least that was my first impression. I soon realized, though, that she wasn't actually tall. She was just floating a solid 2 feet off the ground. She wore a long, pale white, semi-translucent dress that fell clearly past her feet and dragged gently on the floor. A white veil was pinned to her unkempt mane of dark hair and spread across her face. That veil did nothing to disguise the bloodshot and sorrowful eyes, the broken nose, or the mouth that hung open to the center of her chest, leaving a large black void from her cracked and broken top teeth to well past her neck. I recoiled in horror, slipping and falling directly onto my ass before scooting myself back until my back hit a rack of shelves and a hairy taxidermied hand fell onto my lap. I held it up in preparation to do battle, should I need to. The specter, however, paid me absolutely no mind. She merely glided down one of the aisles, raised her hand to delicately select something off a shelf, and then floated back up to Butch's counter. "Evening, Maeve. Just the usual?" Butch asked casually. The woman's cavernous mouth seemed to open wider, and a reverberating moan began to vibrate my soul. It wasn't loud, but it suddenly reminded me of the sound I heard my mother make over my grandfather's deathbed when I was 9 years old. All right, gorgeous. It's $4.50. The woman in white reached out a hand limply and dropped a handful of crumpled bills on the counter. She then turned and slowly guided out of the door. My shaking hands continued to point the furry limb at her, long past the point she was out of sight. Throat lozenges, stated Butch. I swept the arm to point at him, my heart still racing as my eyes went wide. Butch seemed unconcerned. Maeve comes in every night for a pack. Her work leaves her throat pretty sore. I'm not sure if they do much, but it's always the regulars who keep a business afloat. That's a freaking banshee, I almost screamed. Butch's eyebrows raised as though impressed. Wow, I'm impressed. Most humans wouldn't recognize one on sight. Hey, could you stop pointing that thing at me? They can get a little unpredictable if you're not used to them. I kept my impromptu weapon trained on him for another moment before allowing my hand, still tightly clenched, to fall into my lap. I continued to breathe shakily for another moment and then tried to get my head straight. I'm sorry, I said, once I felt I could speak without screaming. That was really not something I expected to see tonight. What the heck, Butch? Banshees are real? And they come in here every night for what? Laryngitis treatment? What is this place? I realized my voice was starting to gain volume again, and I stopped, swallowed, and took another raspy breath. Sorry, I've never reacted well when I get scared. Believe me, I wish that didn't happen to me, but the thing still clamped in my hand suddenly lurched. I curiously glanced down at it, only then fully recognizing what had been clenched in my fist. That's a monkey's paw, isn't it? Yeah, you may want to put that down before you make another wish, Butch said, an amused smile on his face. What did I say? Still scared? Of what? Oh, right, ugly banshee chick. No, I'm good now. Why do my pants smell bad? Butch rolled his eyes. Go ahead and grab a new pair, no charge. Nice. Can I use your bathroom? He nodded towards the far wall of the shop. Purple door. I'd avoid opening any of the others, if I were you. Spoil sport. Is that elevator real? Yes, and no. I'm not answering any follow-up questions until I can't smell you anymore. 10 minutes later, I was feeling much cleaner, if slightly chilly, in my newly bought, off-the-rack stupid shirt and newly gifted booty shorts. I must have been starting to grow on Butch because, other than another twitch in his mouth and a slight shake of his head, he didn't much react to my change of style. So you're actually just a straight human, aren't you? I can't think of another species that would so flagrantly disregard their own safety. Don't watch a lot of online videos, do you? You know what I mean. Even the bloody orgy folk will show up in something tailored, at least. Butch, you had a floating girl in here wearing funeral clothes. Versace. Maeve's taste is old-fashioned, but always quality. I paused with my mouth open before stuttering slowly. All right then, I guess I stand corrected. Should I change so I don't offend the bloody orgy folk? I finally got a full laugh out of Butch. What's your name, kid? Clear. Sorry? Clear. Middle name is Water. My parents were hippies, also big fans of revivals. Man, I thought I drew the short straw when it came to my name, but you got me beat. So what? The shop bell rang again. Unlike the previous customer, I felt not even the slightest twinge of fear as the latest monster strolled through the building. 6.5 feet tall and covered in reddish-brown fur, the man with the overly canine face was sporting an overly cordial grin. The werewolf nodded casually at Butch and began strolling the aisles. Butch nodded back and then raised an eyebrow at me as though interested in my newfound stoicism. Well? He asked, as if unsure whether or not I was gonna crap myself again. I can't believe you gave me a hard time about my booty shorts, and then didn't blink at a freaking werewolf. Butch grunted in satisfaction. Guess that monkey's paw was the real deal. I should bump the price up. You didn't know? He shook his head. It's a good policy not to screw around with a monkey's paw. Had a feeling it was legit, though. A lot of the other stuff we get from that particular estate ended up being, pretty extraordinary. There was a pause. Such as, I demanded. Come on, dude, you can't drop a line like that and not show off a bit. Butch laughed again and turned around to the display wall behind the counter. He pulled down a shadow box and laid it on the counter in front of me. Inside was an almost cartoonishly large revolver. 6 chambers, but with a bulbous barrel that you could have fired a skeet ball out of. There were 3 huge rounds already loaded, but with no caliber that I recognized. You seem like the kind of guy who would appreciate this. He opened the case and gestured for me to pick it up. I did, immediately surprised by its apparent weightlessness. I spun it around my finger, gunslinger style, and leveled it harmlessly towards the door at the end of the hall. The werewolf glanced up at me curiously for a moment before returning to his shopping. Love the way it handles, but I don't recognize the make. One of a kind. They call it the Chekhov gun. I laughed. Seriously? I guess I should fire it then, huh? Probably, but I wouldn't waste the ammo if you don't want to. Those 3 rounds are all there are left. How very hackney, I said, examining one of the rounds. These things seem a little unnecessary, unless you're hunting kaiju. What are they? I've just taken to calling them MacGuffins. I've only seen it used once, during a debate over the bathrooms being only for paying customers. One thing led to another, and a full army of vampires ended up laying siege to the shop. Had to have been at least 400 or 500 of them. Hal shot off a round from this, and it fired an actual sun. Gave me a 3rd-degree burn on every exposed inch of skin. But fried every last one of those fuckers. Wait, it shoots a sun? I asked, incredulously, cautiously setting the gun back on the counter. No, shoots whatever it has to get the job done, Butch explained. That makes no sense whatsoever. You do realize there's a werewolf browsing through old Megadeth CDs 10 feet behind you, right? I turned around and locked eyes with the large, hairy fella for a moment. His tongue lolled out of the side of his mouth in a wolfish smile, and he winked at me. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I still think there's a big difference between ancient legends and relatively modern literary constructs. Butch opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment, the door slammed open with enough force to cause the lights to flicker. I glanced over my shoulder at the darkened doorway, noticing Butch's hand move to rest lightly on the Chekhov's gun on the counter. The werewolf's hackles raised, and a low growl began to rumble from his direction. The man in the doorway seemed human enough, if high-stakes lawyers could be considered human, that is. He was tall, but not intimidatingly so. His suit was well-tailored, his hair immaculate. The charming smile on his face belied the cold contempt in his eyes. "Hey there, Butch," he said, his voice a purring baritone. Long time no see," Butch replied, his voice and face devoid of emotion. "Way too long." The man pulled a coin from his pocket and began rolling it back and forth over his fingers. "Your boss still around? You know I haven't seen Hal in months, not since the incident with the Purgatory delegation. Paychecks are still rolling in, though, so he's out there somewhere. If you find him, let him know I'm taking the fender for a Christmas bonus." Az shook his head in feigned disappointment. "It really would be in your best interest to help me track him down, Butch. You know the deal he made to run this place expires at the end of last month. Now, my employer has a lot of respect for your old man and everything he's done over the years, so he's more than willing to renegotiate terms." Butch shook his head. "You're not hearing me, Az. I don't know where the guy is, and I don't have any way of getting a hold of him. Come on, you really mean to tell me your boss can't suss out where he is?
Starting to get why this little rebellion of his failed. Still not sure how he duped all of you idiots into following his lead, though. Was that like a Trump thing?
As his eyes narrowed.
That's low even for you, Butch.
I laughed involuntarily. I don't know, man, if the MAGA hat fits. Suddenly a force slammed into me, hurtling me over the counter and against the wall behind the register. Shock shuddered through my body as a display of hooks pierced my shoulder. A flood of moisture spread down my back, and I immediately started feeling a little woozy. Also, a lot pissed. I jerked my head up to glare at Az.
Asshole, I just bought this shirt!
I felt myself reverse directions, flying off the wall and across the store. I flailed painfully as I soared, managing to tip over one of the racks before colliding with the werewolf. I couldn't help but marvel at how soft he was as we hit the floor and slid into another rack, bringing its contents down on us. I always envisioned werewolf fur as being more coarse, I thought as I waited out the falling inventory.
Sorry, Jack, I muttered,
rolling away from the werewolf and painfully climbing to my feet. Cool if I call you Jack? I never caught your actual name. Jack growled, shaking his head like a wet dog.
I don't know why you have to make me hurt your friends before you tell me what I want to know, Butch. You know how much it pains me to hurt innocent bystanders.
Butch was levitating over the cash register, his limbs shaking violently as he appeared to be reflexively attempting to swallow his own tongue. I started grabbing anything within reach and throwing it at Az. I managed to score a hit with a tea kettle and an old computer mouse, but it was the lawn dart directly to the head that finally got his attention. Butch took in a raspy breath and fell to the ground as his head spun around to glare at me. His hand shot up and I felt my windpipe close. My hands instinctively went to my neck as I tried desperately to take in air.
Idiot child,
rasped Az, his eyes appearing a dull red as the edges of my vision began to darken.
Do you have any idea who you're...
I lost the rest of his sentence as Jack launched himself into Az, and the two of them flew into another rack. I fell to my knees, sucking in air and letting the world come back into focus. It sounded like Jack got one or two good swipes in with his vicious-looking claws before he flew backwards again, crashing through one of the doors at the back of the store. What lay beyond remained unknown, as the door immediately reformed behind him, pulling back into its shattered wood form until no trace of damage remained. As his head came bobbing into sight over the rack, I got back to my feet. This whole lack of fear thing was really starting to grow on me. You can force choke me all you want, Vader. We both know you're just a whiny, sand-hating little bitch. Az's face was filled with fury as he raised his hand to smite me again. Suddenly, Butch stepped between us, the Chekhov gun leveled squarely at Az's head. Az's look turned to one of contempt, but his hand still lowered slightly.
How many of those bullets are you down, Butch? 2? 3? You really sure you want to waste one on little old me? What then, pray tell, will you use on the one he sends after me? Or the one after that? Eventually the big man himself will want to come. Better hope you still have at least one left for him.
My eyes fell on another gun that had fallen onto the floor in the struggle, one that I had noticed on my first walk through of the aisle. A stupid idea popped into my head. I reached down and grabbed it, cocking it loudly as I leveled it towards Az. "Step aside, Butch," I growled. Butch shot a look at me, saw what I had, and gave me a tight grin as he lowered the Chekhov's gun and stepped out of my way. I squeezed the trigger on the Super Soaker and sent a stream of water directly into Az's face. His scream was piercing as smoke immediately started pouring off his melting face. I stepped towards him, continuously pumping more water as I adjusted my stream to any piece of exposed skin his squirming had left exposed. "The power of Christ compels you, bitch," I yelled, as I stood over him, furiously pumping the squirt gun. "Don't mess with retail workers." Flesh fell from the demon's bones like really good barbecued ribs, bubbling into vapor as it hit the floor. His screams became so high-pitched that I heard a few of the more delicate glass items in the shop shatter. I didn't let up on the stream of water until the plastic toy lost pressure and dribbled to a stop. Az collapsed, his clothes falling into a pile on the floor as his body steamed away. I stood, panting, feeling the adrenaline burning off my skin. My shoulders, forgotten during the fight, began to throb painfully as the squirt gun slipped from my grasp.
Did you seriously just use a Pulp Fiction line on me?
I looked up at Butch in surprise and started to laugh. I mean, how often am I really going to have an opportunity like that? Just couldn't resist. He chuckled along with me.
How did you know that Super Soaker would work?
You made it pretty easy to figure out what he was, what with all the talk about his boss's rebellion. And I thought, with the kind of shit you have here, there was a pretty decent chance that the thing was filled with holy water. Anyway, if it wasn't, I knew you'd probably just look at me like I was an idiot and shoot him with the Chekhov's gun instead. So, you know, what the hell. He chuckled again and walked over to examine my shoulder. "How's it look?" I asked.
I mean, you're gonna need stitches. Probably. But I don't think you're gonna bleed out anytime soon.
I nodded, then glanced over at the back of the shop towards the door Jack had disappeared through. "Is he gonna be all right?" I asked.
Jack? Yeah, he'll be fine. He's a pretty solid guy. Has friends everywhere. I'm sure someone over there will put him up until he finds his way back.
His name is actually Jack? I thought I was just being clever.
Nobody knows his real name. He doesn't talk much, but most people end up landing on that joke eventually, so it's kind of just something that stuck.
Ow, my self-esteem, I deadpanned. What's over there?
Over where?
You said someone over there will put him up. What's over there?
Oh, that door leads to the back rooms. It opens up somewhere different every time, so you actually have to find another way back if you go through it.
I nodded, not really understanding, but increasingly distracted by the radiating pain in my shoulder. Well, let me know next time you see him. I think I owe that guy a beer. Next question is, where's the nearest hospital? He grinned.
Come on, I'll patch you up. Gotten pretty good at it over the years working this job. Only lost a couple of dozen patients.
I nodded and followed as he led to another door behind the cash register. He stopped with his hand on the knob.
Oh, remember how I was trying to figure out why you ended up finding this place? I think I figured it out. You want a job?
I looked at him. I thought about the banshee and the monkey's paw and the werewolf and the demon. Then I thought about the long series of dead-end, boring jobs I'd had up till this point. You don't happen to have a dental plan, do you?